So for those of you who don't know, this is Chris, and let me just briefly introduce him and tell you why he's here. The idea this morning is we're just going to have a little conversation and then invite you into that conversation. So towards the end, we'll have some questions and responses if that's something that you want to do. And of course, you can carry on once we've finished talking to Chris about it, but we really want it to be a conversation. I, along with a few others from the book club that we've got, went across, wherever Murfield is, for an Advent retreat on Meister Eckhart, who is, I think you said, probably the most complex contemplative around.
Yeah.
So he's a 13th century mystic. Anyway, we went to this Advent retreat, didn't really understand much in my head, but I remember sat there coming home and going, something hit me in my heart that was just powerful and beautiful. And I remember thinking that Chris was probably the most non-anxious, non-judgmental person I'd come across. He also was a man of deep conviction. And I found that to me to be a rare combination of having deep conviction, but also being very humble about his convictions.
It's going to make me blush.
And so then when I had some time off, I went down to see him, spent some time with him. Since then, a number of us went on a weekend retreat. Anca and Margaret went on a 5-day retreat. And we've just benefited from what he brings. Chris, my observation is he sits outside the kind of Western evangelical box, which I think is wonderful. Because for me, a healthy spirituality is being challenged on your assumptions and asking you to think through what you actually believe and why you believe it, but being given the choice to reject or accept whatever you are hearing. Now, I do want to say a word right now before we get started about culture. We've been talking about culture, moving from one culture to another culture, and I'm aware that perhaps some traits in our old culture might have been that if something new happened and you felt difficult to flow with, that might have felt challenging. It might have felt like you were wrong or not with it or not on the edge or whatever. So let's just put that out there. That's old culture. That's not where we're going. So I don't present Chris as like, if you don't think where Chris is at, you've not got it. I present Chris as like, he's my mate and I've learned something and maybe we can all learn something. Like, that's it. That's it. And it may be that for you, what Chris shares is a key step on your journey. It may be that where you find yourselves, it's not right helpful. That's okay as well. Because we're all at different journeys, aren't we? And all in different places, and all doing different things. So, there we go. That's my little introduction. But Chris, you lead and founded the School of Contemplative Life. What is it, and what's your kind of mission?
Firstly, can you hear me? Is it working? Good. Well, it's really simple. It's terribly simple. It is to bring back to Christians and to anyone who's prepared to listen the most consistently emphasized aspect of Jesus' prayer life in the Gospels. Now, that might sound quite shocking or surprising. But if you look at Scripture, it's just the case. So, and we'll come on to that in a little bit more detail probably in a minute, but it's to teach and a very ancient way of prayer. You might call it silent prayer, contemplative prayer, or meditation as I call it. Doesn't really matter what you call it. To remind Christians of their own heritage of prayer, their own contemplative heritage, which most Christians today, of any persuasion, know extraordinarily little about. So I make a point, partly because I enjoy it and partly because it sort of opens things up. Whether I'm talking, as I was yesterday here, or a couple of weeks ago to students at a theological college who are right across the board, Anglican Protestants, but right across the board, so Baptists, Methodists, Anglican ministers, to say something to them like, in some part of the talk, normally at the front to soften things up. You know, when you became a Christian, how many of you were taught the Lord's Prayer? Yeah, most people put their hands up. How many of you were taught the way of prayer Jesus teaches immediately before the Lord's Prayer? Nobody puts their hand up. Rarely. Where he provides the balance. Don't babble like the pagans who think because they use many words that they'll be heard. Your Father knows what you need. Don't pray conspicuously so other people will see you praying. Go into the inner room and pray to your Father in secret and silence. And your Father who is in secret and silence will reward you. A way of prayer that has the greatest synergy with the most consistently emphasized aspect of Jesus' prayer life in the Gospels. And what's recorded there is what's unusual and notable. His habits, which the apostles, we're told didn't understand, or took a long time to get their heads around us with so much. His habit of frequently withdrawing to silent, solitary places to commune with his Father. It's just there. But how many are taught about that? Today, almost no one. Up until a few hundred years ago, pretty much everyone. This is not, it sounds new, but actually this is just ancient wisdom. This is what Christians have been talking about and writing about since they started scribbling things down. And they actually said in the 3rd and 4th centuries when they started writing about this in a sort of structured way, this is what was passed to us from Jesus through a line of teachers. So this is not weird newfangled stuff where you have to eat mung beans and veggie burgers, and this is just solid Christian stuff that people have been writing about for ever since the beginning. It's, you might say, unusual that most Christians today are unfamiliar with it. And you see, just to go on slightly, in the Gospels, how this balances with life in a way that just makes complete and utter sense when you think about it. In as much sense as if you don't sleep very well at night, you're not going to be on best form in the morning. So the synoptic gospel writers, each account, and do look this up, each account of Jesus withdrawing is framed on either side with stories of building community, healing, teaching. Jesus withdraws to commune with his Father and then brings the fruit of that out. So you see this extraordinary balance, which just makes sense. You know, we know this. I speak to people at theological colleges and all the young, or they're not so young these days, but all the people who are studying to get revved up, or whatever, however they described it, often in ministry they're exhausted. They're running around, stressed, anxious, and yet we have this model of balance, you know, of how to look after ourselves so we can look after others. It's just there. But, you know, when I speak to theological students and others, they don't know about it. Or they may have read an essay about it, but they've never practiced it. They've never been introduced to it as something you do. Can I just spend 1 minute just telling that little anecdote I told yesterday for people who weren't here? A few years ago, I got to know some young people, so they're in their early 20s, who go to HTB and KXC in London, so the Alpha people. And some of the musicians may know the Hughes Tim Hughes, they're the musicians. So and I was asked to come along to a weekend camp that they were doing, a summer camp, and it happened to be just a few miles outside Cheltenham in Gloucestershire where I live, so that was good. And they were there from the Friday to the Sunday, and I was given this little slot about 5 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, the sort of graveyard slot, if you like, about 100 yards down the road in this little medieval church. And I'd got there early and just to feel the atmosphere and spoken to a few of them. And much to my surprise, because this was utterly new, but they spoke to each other rapidly, and they probably thought, what on earth is he here for? What on earth is he talking about? So at 5 o'clock, 200 of them turned up and packed out this little church and filled the pews, filled the choir stalls behind, sat cross-legged. It was rammed. But I knew that they didn't know anything about this very traditional, older way of prayer. So I fixed them with a certain look and said, does anyone in here know anything about intimate relationships? And suddenly everything went rapidly quieter. And a few were smiling, so I thought, well, maybe you do. And I said, do you know what it's like when you meet someone who is absolutely gorgeous? You just want to be with them all the time. You can't stop talking, and it's wonderful. And you just want to get to know them and share what your favourite food is and where you've travelled, and it's just joyous. It's wonderful. Nodding, quite a few of them. And then I said, has anyone experienced a relationship which has gone beyond that? Which has deepened to a point of synergy and understanding and intimacy, where you can celebrate and share things if you want to. Hopefully you'll never stop. But now, the moments of deepest intimacy are where you say nothing, where words would be completely inappropriate and the other person will probably tell you to shut up. You just look at your beloved and receive their adoring gaze. There's nothing to be said. And the church was very quiet. And I said, well, if we know that about our relationship with each other, why would our relationship with God be any different? Why would prayer be any different? Why can't we have it all, like any healthy, deep relationship? And the first question that came up afterwards was, why has no one told us about this before? It's a good question. Because it's all there. We can have all of it. And that is what a balanced relationship looks like. We know this. We know what it's like when we have a particularly special beloved friend. They're one you can be quiet with. So, aside from Jesus, this is his most consistently emphasized way of prayer, and he is saying very often, come away with me to a quiet place and rest a while. Rest with me. And then go back and share what you've been shown. That's it. That's why the School of Contemplative Life exists.
You kind of talked a little bit about my first question that I had, which was, why is this not taught? This was one of my first thoughts when we first met, and why did it get lost? That was on the front of my mind. And then I guess the other question I have is, how does this fit in life? And I tend to find something and think this is amazing, but it can't be everything. There is, I think yesterday you used the phrase balanced diet. Mm-hmm. So I guess it's like, how does it fit in?
That's a great question. And it's a very modern question, because up until a few hundred years ago, no one would have even thought of asking it. It would have been duh. It would have been as basic as, well, how does sleep fit in? How does drinking water fit in? How does breathing fit in? If you don't do those things, you don't function very well. It's like that. It's as simple as when you are with someone, if you don't listen to them, how does your friendship develop? How do you have a conversation? It's really simple, isn't it? And we can, you can play little games with this and ask yourself sometimes, well, when I am with someone, how much am I actually listening? Or how much am I thinking about, God, how much is this long going on for? Or what have I got to do later? Or actually, I've got this great reply to what you just said. How much are we listening to them or listening to ourselves? How much are we just simply being there with them? So it fits in as naturally as sleeping. Yeah, I bet you do. Busy mum.
One of my first thoughts when we first heard about this was why and what is the benefit? What do you get out of it? I think if I do this, what's the result? If I do this and for how, this is where sometimes I still look for the benefit of it and for what is this going to give me.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's my question.
Yeah. Well, how would it work out if you never listened to your husband? How would it work out if you stopped sleeping? These are really basic things. We ask these questions. How would it work if we never listened to God? And listening to God might be different sometimes from listening to our thoughts about God. Yeah? We're not just listening to ourselves, talking to ourselves. So it's a question as basic as, well, how important is listening? And how is it, we heard this morning, I don't know whether it was done cunningly well, but be still and know. This way of prayer is about, and has been from the earliest centuries, about learning to see how our mind works, the chatter, the constant hamster wheel of nattering in our heads, how we spend very little time in actually dwelling in the gift of our life, but mentally elsewhere. How do we come home to the gift of our life? And that's what this is about. When we learn to still that reactivity a little, that chatter, we suddenly find that we're more present. We see things, we can hear things, we can see people and hear them in a new way. It's very simple.
How shall I phrase this? My experience of what I've picked up from you is that it's less about waiting for God to hear something, though, and just enjoying being with him for the sake of being with him. That's what I would have understood in terms of, I think what you brought to me that was new was this concept that if God is the lover of my soul and he is the most amazing person ever, then I would just want to be with him for the sake of being with him, not because I want to get something from him. And I think a lot of our our consumer culture has come into a lot of our Christian culture. It means I come to church so I get something out of it. Anca's question. Mm-hmm. I sing because then I might feel better and he might speak to me. But it's very transactional. It's very consumer driven. And what I find, and it suits my desire to do something and to act in some way. And one of the reasons that I found what you brought so powerful was I just had to sit there and do nothing and be with him. Which to me is an ultimate expression of love to him. That's not really a question, but...
No, that's a lovely statement. And just to add a little bit of that to that, and I agree with all of that entirely. I remember, I think it's back in 20... Sorry, I know what I'm about to say. That's why I'm laughing. Back in 2016, there was an area dean, it's a Church of England dean in Cheltenham, who ran a big church that had 500 people turning up to each service, and he came up with this idea of a conversation called what happens when evangelical prayer meets contemplative prayer, and a conversation on stage. I think I am an evangelical, but we understand those words in various ways. But there was a moment in the conversation. He came up with these questions and we talked into them. Then there was a conversation, and somebody jumped up from the crowd and almost waved a copy of the New Testament in my face, which was very helpful actually, because I could draw their attention to lots of stuff in it. But they said, we believe that the word has been spoken. It's our job to declare it. What do you think about that, Chris? And I said, well, I completely agree. Of course, I completely agree. But the thing is, God's eternal and unchanging. He's only got one word, and he's always speaking it. So sometimes it might be a good idea to shut up and listen. And that's it. That's it. I did say it a bit more gently, but that's it. If this tradition says we are looking for say all the time, thinking about a particular sort of audible word, we might overlook the fact that everything is God speaking. That all of creation is the Word of God. That's how the early Christians saw it. Creation, all of creation, was seen as divine radiance, light from light, because God is our being. There's only one source of being. And we may not realize that, and we may wander off like the prodigal in the wrong direction. But that's just basic Christian theology. There's only one source of being. God is our being. So in terms of worrying about, whether God is present, we don't need to worry about that, because God is our being. What we need to worry about is how we wander away, how we leave home, and lose sight of it. And this practice is really about coming home. It's all about coming home. And like the prodigal son, all we need to do is just think, that would be a good idea. And that might be helped by falling over really hard. It often is. Hitting a wall, a crisis. But all we need to do, and all of it's grace, even the inclination to even think about it is grace. As Julian of Norwich says, God is the ground of our prayer. Its source, its energy, its end. And what happens? As soon as we turn, well, the prodigal doesn't even get the chance to say sorry or apologize for anything. He's just enveloped in the arms of love. So it can seem a very different perspective. But I can honestly say, and I can bore you, but not today, with lots of text to read and just a pile of history. So you see that this is just the way that Christians thought for most of Christian history. And then lost sight of it.
So maybe we should just do it. Maybe we should just be still together for a few moments. And maybe you could talk about what the practice actually looks like. and means. And maybe we could just do it together, maybe for not as long as we might do on a Wednesday, but for a shorter time.
Yep.
And then maybe we could see if there's any questions or responses about what we're doing and where we're going.
Yeah, we'll just try it for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Good. Well, as soon as Christians started writing down stuff about prayer, and some of the earliest writings were by collections of early Christian contemplatives, which are known today as the Desert Mothers and Fathers. They looked, of course, to Jesus as an example of and teacher of prayer. And they looked at how he met the tempting thoughts in the desert, and that he recited a short phrase of scripture in the face of all this stuff that we have as soon as we try and be still. We see the chatter and all this stuff going on. And he recited scripture. And they had understood this to mean that's a really effective way of standing back from it and not getting enveloped in it and then chatting and chatting and chatting and building it up and up and up. So they developed this tradition, which is still practiced extensively in the rest of the Christian world, in the Orthodox world, of reciting a prayer word or short prayer phrase. One of the most ancient and traditional, which is, you might have heard of, called the Jesus Prayer. Very famous in the Orthodox tradition, right across Russia, Greece, near Middle East, is Lord Jesus Christ with the in-breath, have mercy on me, or us with the out-breath. Recited silently, interiorly, just as a way of giving the surface mind something to hold on to, so that when it dashes away, you can bring it back and become still. Still, still, still. Come home. As they describe very beautifully, come down from the busy moving branches of the surface mind towards the heart, towards the inner room, where God is always present. That's it. Many people use a simple word like love or peace or thank you. And you just recite it silently, interiorly with the breath. And every time you notice you're being distracted, you just come home. Every time you see yourself led away and find yourself watching a little film in your head, you just come home. Just keep coming home to the present. To be present with God. To be present in the gift of our life. To be present with everyone who's around you. So just a simple word with the in-breath, or that Jesus prayer, and with the out-breath. And that's it. And don't worry if you suddenly see that your mind is talking all sorts of nonsense and dashing about all over the place. That's what it does. So we just keep practicing coming home. Let's begin. Good. Can I say a final word? Jesus offers us an invitation and says, come away with me to a quiet place and rest a while. And we know what it's like when we might be busy and stressed and wondering what to do. And we almost need permission. We almost need someone to say, it's okay, for goodness sake, go and have a sleep or just rest. When there's nothing to be said and you can just allow yourselves to be held. Peter had a problem with this, and he got sharply rebuked. He thought the whole thing was about, in some sense, serving God directly. And Jesus said to him, no, I need to wash your feet. And when Peter objected, he got a really sharp rebuke, as if to say, shut up, I'm God, I've not got a problem, you have. I'm here to care for you, so you can care for others. I will wash your feet, let me wash your feet, then you go and wash others. This isn't about a retreat from life. Look at those accounts of Jesus withdrawing to a silent, solitary place to commune with his Father, to come home to the center, and then come out again to heal and love and teach. There's this wonderful, natural, obvious balance. It's not about withdrawing from life. When Jesus and the few went up the mountain and beheld the transfiguration, when they saw something of the divine nature, Peter wanted to stay up there, didn't he? Build some tents. This is nice, I'll just stay up here. And Jesus said, to paraphrase him, no, that's not really the point. The point is to come back down and give away what you've received. So there's this natural balance. We listen, then we give. We accept the love, and then we share it. That's it. Thank you for having me here.
Anybody got anything they particularly want to ask while we're in this forum? It's fine if we don't, but... Or just comments or observations if you were here yesterday. Yes, Joe.
I didn't say anything all yesterday. I think I just wanted to say, when you said about be still and know that I am God, which is a verse I've known all my life, what I was actually doing before was be still and think that I am God. Because I would be still and I'd live on my own, and I quite like quiet prayer, but I would be thinking about God, thinking about how wonderful he is, thinking about his kindness, thinking about, and it's be still and know that I am God. So what it's helped me do is to be still and to know, which is not here, it's here. So to help me kind of with that process of not it being thoughts about God, but actually being and knowing in a deeper place in stillness that he is God and his love for me. So that's what it's helped me with following your practice.
No, thank you very much for sharing that, Joe. And just again, thinking about a very, very simple analogy. I said yesterday, most of us have known what it's like. Well, some of you don't drive yet, but you will. And you might be driving and, you've had a bit of a row, you're listening to something fascinating on the radio, whatever it is. Or you could be walking and then suddenly think, how did I get here? You've been so caught up in your thoughts, you've travelled and you've sort of missed it. Or you might be sat at dinner and just sort of on autopilot, shoving it in. Not really eating. And then there are those moments when, if you come away from your thoughts and you're really present, you can really taste it. Those moments when you might get round here with your beautiful hills to the top of the hill and confronted by the beauty before you, words just fall away. And it's just a moment of wonder. That's it. That's it.
any other comments or thoughts or anything? If you'd sat through yesterday and were like, overnight I've thought this, or anybody else? Yes, Debs, give her a mic.
I was just wondering, like, how you, I don't know what your, like, daily schedule and rhythms are like.
Yeah.
Just wondering if you have any suggestions or about how to build it into your daily...
Great question.
Your daily schedule. Like, what works best for you.
Yeah.
And
By the way, you've got a gorgeous voice. And so have you. Whoever was...
Yeah.
So have you. So have you. And the band's great. So how to... Yeah, that's a very good question. It's a very common question as well. And I won't be mischievous and say, well, how do we build sleep in drinking water? But we do have to plan it. So a really good way to start the day, and this makes a massive difference to how we meet our day, our task, the next person we meet, is early in the morning. A classic time to find 15, 20 minutes. Because if you don't give yourself that time, you won't settle. You won't settle. It takes a while to settle. If you think about it like, a little jar with pond water and silt in it, you shake it up, you can't see a thing, can you? Can't see through it. And then if you leave it, it all settles and the water becomes clear and you can see. So, 15, 20 minutes. I know it's really difficult for young mums, but at the beginning of the day, it makes a massive difference. While you're doing this prayer, it might feel like there's a cocktail party going off in your head or a small riot. You're not causing that. That's just what happened. That's happening all the time. It's just that we don't notice. As soon as you try and be still, you notice it. So you do this simple work and it starts to settle. Starts to settle, starts to settle. And then it feels completely different when you rejoin the day. And other people feel it because you're more present. Just like when someone's at the table and they're looking at the mobile phone, they're not really there. Or when you're in a conversation with someone, you look at their eyes and you think, you're not really there. You know. So try and work it in the morning. Some people who are keen, then also try and work it into a time in the evening. That has the effect of helping to integrate and settle. And just, it has that sort of effect. But the sitting practice is really important because you really meet what's going on in your head. But at other times in the day, especially as you get accustomed to it, you can practice when you're walking. You can practice when you're sitting in the bus. You can practice when you're cooking. And it becomes a really beautiful thing to do. And this was spoken of through most of history as prayer. Classically was talking about these sort of 3 stages. First, it's prayer with the lips. That's the most sort of outer, preliminary type of prayer. Then it's prayer with the mind. So you've engaged the mind. And then what was spoken of is prayer in the heart, where you've developed this way of being present, this way of being centered, so that increasingly, more and more of what you do becomes prayer. And the distinction between prayer and life, it just starts to come together.
I guess the most famous example that you might have heard of is Brother Lawrence and Practising the Presence. And his line where he basically says he worked in a kitchen in a monastery in, you'll know when, a long time ago. And the line is, I was most as present with my Lord washing the dishes as I was in the monastery or whatever. Because he'd learnt to practice that thing. There wasn't a difference between now I'm having my quiet time or reading my Bible and now I'm at work. It was this constant place where he'd come to.
No, that's brilliant. That's brilliantly put. And again, it's often forgotten that God is no more here than anywhere else. As Paul says, God is that reality, that infinite, boundless reality in which we live and move and have our being. So God is always, always present, everywhere. Our circumstances may be more or less conducive to prayer. Praying in a nightclub's hard. Praying here is much easier. But God is never more or less anywhere, but always totally present. So if you think of it like that, that's why I was introduced to this prayer in a Benedictine monastery. They would say, 1,500-year-old rule, directly out of the desert early Christian tradition, would say, no, it may be more conducive in certain ways to pray in chapel, but God is no more present in chapel than when you are cleaning, when you're cooking. So you can pray anywhere. And eventually, of course, as Paul talks about pray without ceasing, well, he doesn't mean babble endlessly, so you end up with a sore jaw and just annoy everybody around you. But if prayer is about a way of life, an orientation, an attitude, an openness towards God, then that starts to permeate everything. It starts to saturate all of our life.
I think it's a discipline. But when I first heard the word discipline, I don't know if some of you may, I had a bit of discipline, you're telling me what to do. But it's more of a discipline because this is something very important to me. And like the same way in our marriage, we have times for everything. And if we didn't put those times in and we didn't make a discipline of spending time together, especially now as life gets busy, we wouldn't spend any time together because everything else would come before it. Everything else would overtake because life just happens. So we have to make the times for us to spend together. We have to make the times where the kids are not there, that we're not talking about everything else and we're just being with each other. But it's not a discipline because I'm going to get told off if I don't. It's a discipline because I am putting something in place because I want to spend this time with you and I want you to spend this time with me. I want to be with you and you with me rather than beating you with a sick discipline.
It's just really simple. It's like the beautiful music we heard this morning. There's a discipline involved in learning how to play those instruments. You don't just get up and do it. You practice, you give time to it. Eventually, it becomes almost second nature. You and the instrument or the voice become one. It just flows. But there's a lot of work before that. You give it that time and attention, like any skill or craft. You put the work in, eventually it becomes almost second nature. And then you hardly think about it. You just become one with the music. You become one with the prayer. As if it flows of its own accord.
Okay, just conscious of the time, but feel free to speak to Chris. You stick around for a little? Yeah, so feel free to call him and talk to him and do anything else. I don't know what else we need to do, Nige.